spoštovani, prav lepo pozdravljeni na Študijskem centru za narodno spravo. Veseli me, da je z nami kolega Adama Hudeka iz Inštituta za sodobno zgodovino iz Prage. Kolega je tam od 2022 štipendist Marie Curie. Drugače je doktoriral in je tudi zaposlen sicer stalno pri Inštitutu za zgodovino pri Slovaški akademiji znanosti in umetnosti. Njegove glavne teme raziskovanja so intelektualna zgodovina socialistične Češkoslovaške, slovaško in češko zgodovinopisje v 20. stoletju, zgodovina slovaških znanstvenih ustanov. V zadnjem času med drugim bil sourednik teh dveh zbornikov o češkoslovakizmu, spravi ta je v originalu, bom rekel, ta je pa potem angleška verzija, ki jo je izdal Odleč. Z Adamom se v bistvu ukvarjamo z zelo podobnimi temami, s tem, da se on fokusira na Češkoslovaško na Jugoslavijo. Tako da smo prišla do tega, da skupaj organiziramo konferenco v Pragi septembra. V sklopu, bomo rekli, priprav na to konferenco pa nam bo Adam danes predaval naslov Predavanje Slovaški nacionalni komunizem kot intelektualna tradicija in politični program. Sovpada z njegovim trenutnim Marie Curie projektom. Prepričan sem, da bomo zvedeli marsikaj novega iz njegovega predavanja. Dear Adam, thank you for coming to Ljubljana, and the floor is yours. You have 35 minutes and hopefully we'll have a short discussion afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for the introduction. The topic of my presentation will be the Slovak national communism, which will deal with the quite ambivalent and dynamic relations between communist ideology and nationalism in Czechoslovakia in the let's say short 20th century, from the establishing of the Czechoslovak Republic till the mid 80s. As you see, the notoriously well-known phrase of Milovan Djilas already in the 1950s. He said that the communist regimes had to become national to maintain themselves. If we look at the history of the communist parties, or the majority of the communist parties, we can say that already in the 30s or late 20s, even the communist parties could see that they have to become at least a little bit nationalist to maintain themselves and to be interesting for the voters. The phrase national communism, of course, is an analytical term which was never really employed by the communist regimes. However, it can be used for the process of applying the universalist Marxist Leninist ideology to the various national, political, economic, social and cultural conditions in the various states or nations in the Central Eastern Europe. As I already said, the national communism, I would say, predates and also outlives the existence of the socialist dictatorships, because it was in the interwar period, it was part of the politics of the communist parties, and even after the fall of the communist regimes, we could see that the national communism has some afterlives, especially in the former communist federations, and we can see it also in Yugoslavia, and we can see it also in the Czechoslovak Federation. If you look at the problem of national communism in Czechoslovakia, you can see it's let's say simplified and more sophisticated version of the Yugoslav discussions. It was because it dealt only with two nations, and we have to say that the Czechs were not very interested in these discussions. It was more or less the problems of the Slovaks which were creating and fostering the discussions of the Czech and Slovak relations and the need to solve them. And we can also say that the nationalist aspect of the communist part of the communist ideology was gradually getting more important as the Marxism-Leninism was losing appeal in the socialist dictatorships. So it was probably most important in the 70s and 80s as a tool of gaining legitimacy of the socialist regimes. However, we have to say that the communists since the 1930s were trying to portray themselves as the heirs of national traditions and guardians of the national interests, which is the aspect which became extremely strongly after the Second World War, and was closely connected with the development of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union as the main role model for majority of the communist parties. If you look at the national communism in Slovakia, the relevance of the Slovak case for the research of the national communism lies in three key aspects, I would say. The first is the significance of the national questions in the Slovak communist movement already since the creation of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia in 1921. And the second is the changing functions which the Slovak national communism acquired in the existence of the Czechoslovakia from the alternative to the rightist conservative clerical nationalism, which was very strong in the interwar period, till the very program of the Czechoslovak resistance movement in the Second World War, through the ideological heresy of the bourgeois nationalism in the 1950s, emancipatory movement in the 1960s, legitimizing narrative of the real socialism orthodoxy in the normalization Czechoslovakia in the 70s and 80s, and also the very important part is that the remodeled national communist narrative, and also its author, played a significant role in the Czech-Slovak post-communist transformation, and also in the dissolution of Czechoslovakia and the creation of the so-called illiberal democracy in the Slovakia in the 90s. The main issue of the Slovak national communism, we have to say, is the issue of the Czech-Slovak relationships and the form of the Czechoslovak state. In the shadows, there is also some anti-Hungarian notes of the national communism, which was presented there since the interwar period, and the ever problematic coexistence with the ideological orthodoxy, because as we have said, that the nationalism and communism went through various phases, where sometimes it was supported somewhat, sometimes it was seen as an ideological heresy, and especially in the countries which consisted of more nations, it was the ever existing problems. If you look at the Slovak national communism, and its problem with the Czech-Slovak relationships, there are two basic axioms which the Slovak communist movement was based on regarding the existence of Czechoslovakia. The first is that the Slovaks are the independent nations with the right to self-determinations according to Leninist principles. And the second one was that the Slovak, since 1918, decided to live in a common state with the Czech people. And this needs to have some common ground, and the common ground was the federalization of Czechoslovakia, which was seen by the many Slovak communists as the crucial conditions of the success of socialism in Czechoslovakia. And the federalization was seen as the ideal middle ground between the interwar Czechoslovakism, that's the idea that the Czechs and Slovaks create one Czechoslovak nation, and the Slovak separatism, which was among the Slovan communism seen as a product of so-called clerical fascism of the Slovak wartime republic, which existed from 1939 till 1945. If we look at the interwar period, at first, when the Czechoslovak Communist Party was created in 1921, as a consequence of the rupture of the Czechoslovak social democracy, the national questions did not rank among the urgent problems of the movement, and the Czechs and Slovak communists were basically happy with the existence of Czechoslovakia. They even acknowledged the usefulness of the ideal of Czechoslovakism, that the Czechs and Slovak create one nation, because they see the Czechoslovakia as a state which represented the fulfillment of the aspirations of the Czechs and Slovak, and I would say this is a common situation as in Yugoslavia in the 1920s. Still, the Slovak communists had to deal with the issue of Czech-Slovak relationship from the very beginning. However, in the 20s, the biggest problems was the Hungarian one, because the very strong Hungarian part in the Comintern fostered the idea that the ideal state for the world revolution would be that there will be some renewal of the greater Hungary as a socialist state, and the Slovakia would be naturally part of this socialist commonwealth based on the old Hungarian kingdom. So the Slovak communists at that time would see that the coalition with the Czechs is somehow a bulwark against the what they saw the nationalist claims of the Hungarian communists, and after the short-lived Hungarian Soviet Republic from the 1919, the Hungarian communists were seen as an enemy and became this traditional others of the Slovak historical narrative as the Hungarians as the usual enemies. So even the Hungarian communists were seen as the people which has to be avoided. However, the Slovak communists were actually quite radical in their claims, as the Slovakia was the poorer and the weaker part of the Czechoslovak state. So the Slovak communists were traditionally always more radical and more looking towards the Comintern and the Soviet communists than their Czech counterparts, which had because the Czechs had. The Czech Communist Party was basically the third, the Czechoslovak Communist Party were basically the third biggest party in Europe after the after the Soviet and the German one, and the Czech communists were quite in the 20s. They were quite autonomous, as they could see that they could live without the support from the Soviet Union, so they were not very eager to accept the 21st points of the Comintern and to become the vessel basically of the Comintern, as many other communist parties were. However, the Comintern used the Slovak communists as the perspective tool of Bolshevization of the party. And there you can see that the very pragmatism of the Slovak communism at this time. They would say that we are not Czechoslovak patriots, but we see that the Hungarians are the biggest of the two evils. So in this sense, we are sticking with the Czech colleagues. But if our objectives are not fulfilled, our stance will change accordingly. And this basically happened after the 5th Congress of the Comintern, where the Czechoslovak idea was rejected, and it was said that the Leninist credo for the that every nation has a right to independence should be preferred. So the radical communist functionaries at that time really started the politics of let's say national Bolshevism, and used it in the party struggle to demand the autonomy not only of their communist of the Slovak part of the party, but for the whole Slovak for the whole Slovakia in the Czechoslovak Republic. And this the high of this process happened in 1926, where the Slovak communists published a very radical compilations with the name "Get Out of Slovakia," which was named for the Czech bourgeoisie, and they decided, and they won the referendum on the stance of Slovakia in the Czechoslovakia. However, this was sidelined very quickly as the center of the party dismissed this whole activity, and it was really you could see that they actually the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia actually formally accepted the Comintern line, but they never had the idea that they should work towards the destruction of Czechoslovakia in reality. So the Communist Party basically used the national idea as a tool for escalating social tensions, as a tool to get voters, but they never actually really thought about this, destruction of Czechoslovakia or creating Czechs and Slovak state or whatever in this sense. However, they used the next group, which were the Slovak communist intellectuals, the first generation of the Slovak communist intellectuals, who created the group which so-called DAF, the crowd in English, which worked as a party's intellectual satellite, basically to put the communist ideas among the Slovak intelligentsia, and to show the friendly face of the Communist Party to the outside world. And these people were allowed to present the nationalist programs for the Slovak communists in the form of the federalization in the form of the Soviet type of federalization for Czechoslovakia. However, also this group had no plan for implementation of the federalization at this time, and their ideas were just somehow intellectual exercise meant for the Slovak society, especially its intellectual part. What is important? One of the main figures of this group was Gustav Husák, the future Czechoslovak president and the most important figure of the Czechoslovak communist movement in the 70s and 80s. It is important to say that actually after the 1929 the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia went to the thorough Bolshevization, and it became a typical Stalinist party, centralized and with basically no really nationalist agenda, except of the agenda which was used for the escalating of social tensions. However, the Second World War really changed the whole idea, and with the dissolution of Czechoslovakia in 1939, the independent communist party of Slovakia was created, and as the Slovak state was officially acknowledged by the Soviet Union for the short time, the Czechoslovak idea was at this time for more or less abandoned, and you can see that the typical topic of the time was that what the communists wanted was the Slovak state yes, the Slovak fascists no. So for a short period of time, the idea of Soviet Slovakia emerged as a Slovakia as an independent communist state, or the part of the Slovakia as a part of the Soviet Union. This all changed when Soviet Union was attacked by the Germany, and its vassal state, the Slovakia. So the idea was again that the Slovak state cannot exist again, and the official Soviet policy changed to renewal of the Czechoslovak state. And in 1943, as an agenda of the agenda of the Slovak of the renewal of Czechoslovakia became the part of the Slovak anti-fascist resistance, where Slovak communists had a very prominent role, and especially Slovak National Communists had a very prominent role there. So they were able to force or to create the agenda of the Slovak National Communism. This means the socialist Czechoslovakia and the federal Czechoslovakia in the program of the resistance, and they were clearly inspired by the Yugoslavia at the end of the world, because they would say that not the Soviet Union but the Yugoslavia is the ideal Slavic federation, which was democratically and justly resolved all disputes. And the Gustav Husák, as a prominent figure of the so-called Slovak national uprising from the 1944, stated it quite clearly when he said that the Czechoslovak statehood and the Czechoslovak people are the completely different concepts. That the Slovaks still go for the Czechoslovakia, but the Czechoslovakia has to be federalized. However, things get very different, get a very different route after the end of the Second World War, because despite the federalization was seen as a natural thing after the renewal of Czechoslovakia, it was very differently. It was very different in the end. There are many reasons for it. The first one was that the Czech part of the Republic was strictly against the federalization. Even the leadership of the Communist Party, which became the strongest party after the semi-free elections in the 1946, started to waver about the federalization, and it was also because the Stalin didn't like the prospect of Czechoslovak federalization, because he would say that the centralist Czechoslovakia would be better to govern by the centralist communist party. And after the Tito-Stalin splits, the former ideas of the Slovak national communists as the Yugoslavian Federation as the ideal became very problematic for them when the hunt for the bourgeois nationalists started also in Czechoslovakia. However, after the communist coup in 1948, the new constitution recognized the existence of the Slovak nation and also said that the Czechoslovakism of the First Republic was a bad theory, which was against the national needs of the Czechs and Slovak. So, however, the problem was that the construct of the Czechoslovak nation was in the communist Czechoslovakia replaced by the construct of Czechoslovak working peoples, which has the more or less the same use as the idea of Czechoslovak nation. As it was said that although in Czechoslovakia there are two nations, the working people are connected by the common statehood, and they create the Czechoslovak nation. In the 50s, finally, with the help of the Soviet counselors, the bourgeois nationalism in Czechoslovakia was seen as a crime against the unity of the republic, and the Slovak national communists were silenced, went to prison, and in case of the Vladimir Clementis, at the time the Ministry of Foreign Matters, he was executed in the political trial. Gustav Husák went to the prison for life at that time, for 24 years, and basically any idea of the Slovak emancipatory program among the Slovak communists was criminalized for the next decade. However, and it was one of the paradoxes that whole situation was changed with the changes of in the Soviet Union, because although till the beginning of the 60s there was still the celebration of the Czechoslovak homeland and the fraternal unity of Czechs and Slovaks, and the bourgeois nationalism was still seen as a crime. The push from the Soviet Union also involved the rehabilitation of the bourgeois nationalists and the bourgeois and in the sense also the bourgeois nationalism, because with his new politics, Khrushchev's acknowledges the possibility of nation-specific parts to communism, which was because he needed the good or to have the relationships with Yugoslavia. However, this whole idea went through to the Soviet-connected Eastern Bloc, and the Czechoslovak communist leaderships, despite it was led by the let's say, art Czechoslovakist Antoni Novotný had no another possibility than to accept that even the Slovaks have the possibility to the nation-specific part to communism, and the communist centralism is not the only way how it should be done. This ended in a great surge of nationalism in Slovakia, which was basically led by the former by the national communists prosecuted during the 1950s, and it was not it was very important to say that especially Gustav Husák put himself as a fore of this new national surge in the 1968 during the Prague Spring, when the national communists were at the forefront of the Slovak national movement, and they would consequently say that the centralism, the Czechoslovakist chauvinism, as they say it, and the prosecution of the national communists and the rejection of federalization were the component of the Stalinism, and these with the Stalinizations also their ideas are rehabilitated, and the democratization of Czechoslovakia during the Prague Spring must be linked with the demand for the federalizations. The problem was that the federalization was one of the programs which would be fulfilled during the Prague Spring. It was agreed on already during the early 1968 when the new communist leadership under Alexander Dubček, also a Slovak, although he was not a big fan of the federal Slovakia, would say that yes, after all these years, the Slovakia would get its federal constitutions, although the Czech part, not only the Communist Party but also the Czech part of the society, didn't really see the federalization as an important part of the reform movement. And in Slovakia, it's very early. It was obvious that the reform movements would split among the line which thing is more important, if it's democratization or the federalization, because the so-called Democrats or the reformists in Slovakia would say that the federalization is only a part of the democratization process which should go more deeply, and we should concentrate more on the political functioning of the republic, versus the nationalists, and which would be the future normalizator, which was headed by Gustav Husák, would say that federalization is for the Slovak is the federation is on the first place of the needs, and the democratization should stop before it threatens the socialist form of the country, and so the Czechoslovakia wouldn't go back to the bourgeois democracy of the Western world. And it has to be said that after the invasion of the Warsaw Pact armies and the so-called normalization in Slovakia, the Slovak communist nationalism was tolerated when it was not linked to the political reform. So in 1969, the Czechoslovakia became the socialist federalization. It was basically the only reform which survived the Prague Spring, and Gustav Husák becomes the general secretary of the party. In 1968, Alexander Dubček is ousted, and basically it would seem that the Slovak national communists, after 40 years or nearly 50 years of continuous political life, got what they wanted, and according to the new communist national axiom, the real socialism of the normalization Czechoslovakia with the federalist Czechoslovakia was the best of the possible worlds for the future development of Czechoslovak federalization. However, to becoming the legitimizing tool for the normalization orthodoxy, the Slovak national communism had to lose its emancipatory drive. It has to be de-radicalized and cleansed of any democratic or reformist traces. So, as Gustav Husak said, with the federation, the national question has been resolved, and it's necessary to strengthen the Czechoslovak awareness in the people, including the national minorities, and everything has to be included in the real socialist establishment, and all the previous reformist activities has to be seized and were denounced as the rightist heresy in the communist parties. This meant that the national communism ceased to play an important role in the politics and was moved to the culture and intellectual life in Slovakia. So the Slovak national communists of the normalization period started to work as the representatives and guardians of the Slovak traditions, of the Slovak nations, and for their loyalty they became important posts in television, mass media, publishing houses, academies, universities, and so on. So they became more or less the gatekeepers of the normalization Slovakia. They would basically get the monopoly on the national questions at that time, which enabled them to play a role of the basically opposition, basically, in this sense that they still could use the nationalist agenda. They still could criticize the Czech or the Prague-based centralism. They still could criticize the Czech part of the country of not paying enough attention to the development in Slovakia, because it has to be said that in the Czech part of Czechoslovakia there was no such an idea as the national communism. The Czech side of the Czech part of the country didn't have this communist nationalism compared to the Slovak one. But this monopoly of the Slovak national communists was also the problematic for the dissent, because any alternative national narrative in Slovakia, which could be used by the dissent, was automatically labeled as a clerofascist nationalism, as something which has to be purged, and something which was also problematic for the potential support of the dissent from the Western countries. So in this sense, even the Catholic dissent had to cease to be a national opposition and had to more concentrate on the regional questions and not the questions of the Czech-Slovak relations. It is also important to say that during the normalization, the Slovak national communism started to have a very conservative and isolationist and a defensive notion. So which was very close to the ultra-conservative Slovak nationalism of the 19th century. And if you look at the first man of the Slovak national communism of that time, the writer and intellectual Vladimír Mináč, you can see that his national communism was strictly anti-Czech, very anti-Hungarian, very conservative and defensive of Slovakia, and which is also very important. It was still pro-Russian, and it was clear Russophilia notes, because the negative odors compared to many other or the many other national communists in the Eastern Central Europe was not the Soviet hegemony. The problem was the Czech hegemony. So the Russians were still seen as the traditional ally of the Slovak national emancipation, as it was in the 19th century. However, in the 1980s, the cooperation between normalization regime and the Slovak national communism started to have some cracks, because as the new constitution was starting to be prepared in the 1980s, the Slovak national communists and even the new generation of them, so the people which were around 30 and worked at the academia or at the universities, saw this as a step back, as something which will even strengthen the federal part of the country, and especially the Prague center. So they started to oppose even not only the cultural part of the regime of the Czechoslovak politics, but the whole political structure of the Czechoslovakia. They started to say that Slovakia has to get more independence in the Federal Republic. They started to speak about sovereignty. They started to speak about rights of the nations for independence, and they started to really more strongly criticize not only the so-called Prague hegemonialism, but also the constitution of the socialist Czechoslovakia. However, after the fall of the communism, once again it seemed that the question of the Czech-Slovak relations, then the national questions will be in the shadows in favor of the economic and political transformation, of the democratization, and so on. So even the people which had strong ties with the former Slovak national communism were very much despised by the new post-dissident elites. And they were seen as the real traitors, as the real renegades of the normalization time. However, even already in the at the half of the second half of the year 1990, with the ideas of the renaming of the state and changing the flags and the symbols of the Republic, there was a big national surge in Slovakia, which meant then that the Slovak national communism get back to the fore, as the people who really worked for years on the national questions. They had a real expertise in this sense, and they really started to serve the new political currents which were becoming very strongly in Slovakia, the nationalists and the ethnopopulists. And they were very successful. They were able to utilize the democratic possibilities. They started to create various initiatives, various groups with the demands for more sovereignty for Slovakia, which gradually changed to Slovak independence, and they could get support of thousands and tens of thousands of people, which they could use as a political tool to and can get back to the politics. They were basically, which is important, they were useful, or their positive thing was that they could prevail against the far right nationalism, which was at that time getting stronger in the 90s because of the influence of the Slovak post-war exile, so-called Ludak exile. So the people who would support the wartime Slovak Republic. So what didn't really happen in Croatia, that could happen in Slovakia. So the Slovak national communists could prevail over the far right in Slovakia, and because of them, for example, it was the Slovak national uprising and not the Slovak state which became the most important symbolical day in Slovakia. On the other side, these people were among the main supporters of the Mečiar's government, which was the first, which was labeled as a illiberal democracy by Farid Zakaria in the 1997, and they really served Mečiar and created the national ideology for him, which proved to be very important in Mečiar's political victories in the 90s Slovakia. So in this sense, in the first and part of the second half of the 90s, the Slovak national communists really get back to their national era status as the important people in the state media, publishing houses, and so on. However, this time they didn't have the monopoly because Mečiar never managed to get like the Orban-style dictatorships. So in the end, in the 1998, with the electoral victory of the anti-Mečiar bloc, also majority of the Slovak national communists ended their afterlife and went more or less to obscurity, only partly to be some of them get their jobs in the social democratic party, but that was already the new generation, and the Slovak national communism therefore somehow stopped or ceased to play the important role at the latest in 1998. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for your lecture. I'm opening the discussion. If there is anyone in the audience that would like to pose a question. Što tudi se to Slovenščini?
Thank you for your very nice presentation of that problem. I would ask you about two things. First, I'm not very familiar, but basically I know something. What was the language policy of the Slovak national communism? Because I know that some disappointments were in the 1980s because Bratislava University established the same year as Ljubljana University started to operate in Czech language.
Mm-hmm.
So and that was some disappointment about that regard. So what was the language policy after 1945, or it started to operate in Slovak language in the Slovak Republic of Czechoslovakia? And the second thing, The second question, it will be about those comparisons between Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia after 1945. I see one big difference which is not noticed in some books, that in Czechoslovakia the political center and the economical center was in the same part of the state. But in Yugoslavia it was not the case. So in all your presentation it was nowhere mentioned about 50s and 60s economical connotation of those nationalist questions, because in Yugoslavia some Slovene representatives have much talked about. They talked about economical principles and economical questions. What about that comparison with the Slovak case?
Yes, that's a very good aspect which I really didn't mention, and it still has its importance. The first, the language policy. Yes, after 45, it was one of the very important program line of the Slovak communists, that the whole Slovak cultural life would be completely Slovakized. That meant no more using Czech at the universities. It was also very strongly focused on the anti-Hungarian stance. That is true, but it was also seen by the Slovak communists as one of the steps to abandon the Czechoslovakist idea, so that everything in Slovakia would be in Slovak, although of course the Czech language was normally accepted everywhere, but they really would declare that in the 1945 Republic would be very different from 1918 Republic, in the sense that no Czech administrators, no Czech teachers, no Czech cultural workers would be transferred to Slovakia to, let's say, to help the Slovaks to get to the higher level as it was in 1918. So this was a very strongly presented idea by the Slovak communists, because they knew that this politics of sending Czechs teachers and so on to Slovakia was hugely unpopular already in 1930s. So this was one sense in one aspect the populist policy, but another aspect. It was of course a very realistic policy, because in 1945 the Slovakia already has enough of its own people, and it would seen as a very negative sense if the unemployed Czech people would be sent to Slovakia, and the Slovak experts wouldn't get their post. So it has to be said that this politics of Slovakization, that everything has to be Slovak and the Slovaks has to be employed in Slovakia, was a very strong part of the politics of the Communist Party, not only of the Slovak national communists, but also the people who would go more with the Czechoslovak patriotism. They really had this politics that the Slovakia has to be ruled by the Slovaks. And after the creation of federalization, there were also, let's say, some type of numerus clausus that in the federal institutions the 1/3 of the people should be from Slovakia. It was quite agreed on, and it was like this till the end of Czechoslovakia. For example, it was always like when the president was Slovak, the prime minister had to be Czech, and vice versa. And the economic aspect, yes. That is a thing which I omitted, was always very important. In the 50s, the economic equalization was seen as I think it was same as in Yugoslavia, was seen as an alternative to the federalization. So when federalization was abandoned by the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, the Slovak communists created this alternative politics that which said that in order to get the equality of Czechs and Slovaks, the Slovakia has to be brought to the Czech level of the economic development, and it was believed also that by economic equalization the national problems of the Czechs and Slovaks will disappear. This is, by the way, the same politics basically during the 19th century Hungarian liberals had, that they would also say that economic equalization means the disappearance of Czechoslovak of nationalist problems in Czechoslovakia, and this politic was also used during the interwar republic. So it was nothing new, but it really led to the really harsh and really very quick industrialization of Slovakia. That was the politics. Of course, the national tensions did not disappear, but during the hunt for the bourgeois nationalism, this was the official policy, that the economic equalization equals the disappearance of the national problem. And also one of the main reasons for the Prague Spring was that the Czechoslovakia was economically declining. So the important part of the reform process was the economic reforms, which was also led to the problems in the economic milieus, because the Slovak economists would say that the proposed reform, the Schick's reform, didn't accent the specifics of the Slovak policy, and at that time this rift appeared, and this Czechoslovak economic school, which would have basis in the 68th reform, survived the whole normalization period, and after the 1989 it were the economists, Slovak economists, with the which had their important role in the 1968 reform process, which emerged again, and many of them became one of the fiercest proponents of the dissolution of the state and the independent Slovak Republic. So even these people would be very important in this afterlife of the Slovak national communism.
What was the attitude of that so-called national communists toward the Slovak minorities? For example, in Ukraine, in Hungary, from Yugoslavia, in the time it means mid-80s.
That was a little bit problematic thing, because it was some compromise in the whole Eastern Bloc, that the states wouldn't, that the socialist states wouldn't problematize each other's national minority. So even between the Slovaks and the Hungarians, there was for a very long somehow silent deal that Czechoslovakia wouldn't protest against the dealing with the Slovak minority and Hungarian and vice versa. But the fact is that and with the Yugoslavia it was easier, because the Slovak minority in Yugoslavia didn't had a real problem national-wise, and it was same with the Slovak minority in Romania. They had a much better position than the Hungarian minority in Romania. So this was not such a big problems, but still there was the institution Matica Slovenska, which was I think the same institutions were in Yugoslavia, which was one of the focal point of the Slovak national communism, and this institution really one of these objectives was to take care of the minorities in other countries, but this was only the cultural support, so books, teachers, but not the political involvement, like regarding the rights and the stance of the minorities.
I do apologize my ignorance, but I would like to ask about legal or even parliamentary status position in the interwar period of the Communist Party.
As the Czechoslovakia was more or less liberal democracy from the 1918 till 1938, the Communist Party was a normal part of the political life. So it was in parliament, it has its MPs, it was part of the votes, and it was generally second in the first three or the first four strongest parties in the during the interwar Czechoslovakia. It was never in the government. It was always the opposition, but it was a tolerated, more or less tolerated part of the system. I would say in 1925 it was even the second strongest party in the Czechoslovakia. It was generally very popular, more popular in Slovakia in the means that they generally get about the 10% of the votes. After the Bolshevization in 1929, when the Communist Party directly said that it's basically its main political program is the change of the regime in Czechoslovakia, it was more prosecuted. The communist press was censored heavily or even disbanded, but it never was completely pulled out of the political life.
If not, I have two questions. So first one would be this Slovak national revival in the beginning of the 1960s. Dubček takes over and etc. But I would be interested in how much was this idea of intellectual circles inside of the party, and how much did they react towards the pressure from below? I've read quite a lot on that they were receiving hundreds of letters of people complaining about Slovak status inside Czechoslovakia, or that Slovaks are not in charge of their own institutions, etc. So this would be my question, and the second would be connected with Husak and that quote you had about the Czechoslovak awareness and the minority. So, if I understood it, I would interpret that as Husak being afraid of separatists or the dissolution of the state in a way. So, even though he was, let's call him a Slovak nationalist, but still kind of having in mind that he needs some kind of a bonding concept that would be a civic or state identification that would also include minorities, which in fact is something that the Yugoslav party in the late 1960s interpret Yugoslavism as something that is not connected to ethnicity, and it's open also to minorities. So basically, if you want to be a Yugoslav, you can be a Yugoslav.
Okay, during the late 60s, let's say there was always a pressure from below, but during the Stalinist era and the post-Stalinism, the Communist Party basically didn't care about these problems, and was able and had the tools how to ignore or suppress these kind of problems. During 1960s, of course, with the democratization the reform process, the Communist Party started to take care about this about these problems, and with the bringing sociology back at the time, they started to get more precise statistics of the feeling of the population, and they basically knew how was it. Sure, that when the situation got a little bit loose, that all the dissatisfactions started to get more visible, and it was also because the people get more freedom, and they could write such letters. They could write in the newspapers, because during the 60s, even during the 1960s, the early 60s, writing a letter that the Slovaks are not equal in the Republic would be seen as a bourgeois nationalism and could be prosecuted. And the people like Husák and his collaborators, so the Slovak National Communists, very wisely used this unsatisfaction, and you could see that the Husák speeches were widely seen, widely read, and the people were really shouting and clapping when he was speaking about federalization. So yes, the whole return of the Slovak National Communists back in the late 60s was based on the national surge and the white popularity they had in Slovakia, and in this sense they could use this popularity to get what they want from the political party leaderships, and they also did. The problem was also that the Slovaks in general, and it was more and more visible, didn't see the people or the Slovaks which were working in Prague as the Slovaks. They more or less saw them as a Czechoslovakists, as a Czech renegades, whatever. So these people didn't have the popularity as Husák or others which were based in Slovakia. So they really used this their popularity, although Husák was never even close more popular than Dubček at the time. That's also true. And it's also true that even after the invasion, the National Communists could use the popularity to plant themselves in the political position and to say, see, we are the Slovaks, although we are going to cooperate with the Russians, but we are the lesser evil. So if you wouldn't get us, somebody from the Czech part or the Czech communists will come and they will even destroy the federalization. So they could use it, but it was only for the very short time span, and after that, since the second part of the 70s, the Husák was as unpopular in Slovakia than in Czech part of Republic. And in bonding concept, there are two things. First is that the Husák never, despite being the homo politicus and being in the politics since 1930s, he never had experience with the whole state politics. He never was in Prague. So when he went there, he could see that the Slovak nationalism he was promoting could be dangerous for the for the existence of federation, which he couldn't see from Bratislava. So the change of mind could be also this one, that as at the head of the state he could see what's this Slovak nationalism could be problematic, and but also these were the notes he would get from Brezhnev, that the federalization, yes, but the Czechoslovakia needs stability, and this needs to de-radicalization of the Slovak nationalism, regardless if it's the nationalism in the Communist Party. So this the Husak got the objective to quell this, and so it could be, but it couldn't endanger the socialist federalization of the state. So this was another point, and the new generation of the Slovak national communists really clearly saw that, and they would say that after one of them would say that after Husak would say his first speech in Czech, we would say that he's lost for us, and he's no more one of us. So he was seen as one of more or less a renegade by the Slovak national communists, and of course that. But the main point, I would say, the normalization was a concept which has its basic in the stability. So this was the main political objective of Husak, to achieve stability, to have a federalization which would be stable, and they would say see the federalization as something which would in the end promote some Czechoslovak patriotism, some Czechoslovak bonding. When the Slovaks finally get what they wanted, the Federal Republic, they would be more prone to be the Czechoslovak patriots, because they would be content, they would be happy what they got, and they would stop being destabilizing part of the republic, as it happened in 1939, for example, or the 1968. So this was the idea, which sadly didn't really pay out in the end.
Thank you. Last call.
You mentioned Matica Slovenska, but in that normalization process, it was ever, for example, such an institution. It was, I think, for comparison, in Yugoslavia, more alike like Croatian and Serbian, which was semi-state organization, not comparing to Slovenska, or Česká Matica, which was always a one-week society, because it need to be anything else. But it was in that time of normalization somehow seen as a dangerous part, or too radical, too national, as comparing to Hrvatska Matica, Hrvatska, which was not forbidden, but let's say frozen at 70s and 80s.
Not at that time. Matica was seen as a problem in the 1940s because it was one of the institutions which had very close bonds with the Klerofascist Slovak regime. It was nearly disbanded, but as the Matica was the last time disbanded during the height of the Magyarization, the communists would say that it's impossible to make it again, because Slovaks wouldn't like it at all. So this was the first time, and the second time the Matica Slovenska had the big problems with Antonín Novotný during the height of the centralization efforts in the 1960s. The Matica Slovenska, when Antonín Novotný as a president and the first secretary of the party went to Matica, it ended in a scandal because Novotný said the Matica is a Klerofascist institution. Still, they said he didn't accept the gifts or the presents he got from Matica. So that was a great scandal, and at the time Matica was again somehow endangered. But instead of Matica, it was the end of Novotný, because this was a part of the Slovak nationalist surge and somehow he didn't survive. But during the normalization era, Matica was directed by Vladimir Mináč, which was the new leader of the Slovak National Communists, the very loyal normalization intellectual. And despite the Matica was really there to always criticize the Czech hegemony, the Czechoslovakism, the Czech chauvinism, it was just a shadow play, and in fact it was a very loyal and properly normalized institution which didn't had any problem to live in the normalization era. So when Matica had a problem, it was during the bourgeois nationalist heresy, when it was really endangered, and even the few people which were working in Matica as scientists were imprisoned during this late 50s and early 60s.
Okay, to lahko zaključimo tem za danes. Thank you, Adam, again for your lecture.
Thank you very much.
Hvala vsem, ki ste prišli, vabljeni tudi na naše druge dogodke. Hvala lepa.